After my father's passing, as we gathered to mourn, discussions about his assets and inheritance quickly took center stage. My brother-in-law, married to my elder sister, Amy, boldly claimed that she should inherit everything, including $12 million. While they celebrated prematurely, the lawyer intervened, stating that such decisions were not theirs to make. I am Benjamin, a 39-year-old sales professional, married with 2 children. My father was a significant shareholder in a company and continued to work despite his age. Amy, always the problematic sibling, had a tumultuous past with our parents due to her erratic behavior. Despite reaching her 50s, she lacked a stable job and lived life on her whims. Her impulsive nature peaked when she married Peter, a younger and quite indolent man, and recklessly spent the money our father provided for their wedding. Her assumption was that she would eventually inherit all, leading her to make continual financial demands. The demise of our father was a severe blow. He suffered a heart attack while golfing. I took the responsibility of arranging his funeral as Amy was absent, indulging in her usual escapades. The subsequent day, a lawyer arrived to discuss the will, and Amy and Peter audaciously declared that everything should go to her. Their claim was met with disbelief and ultimately a shocking revelation from the lawyer. Amy was not our father's biological daughter and had never been legally adopted, despite her beliefs. This news struck Amy hard, sparking a confrontation with our mother about her biological origins and adoption status. The turmoil escalated as legal nuances were discussed, and it became clear that Amy, though older, was not entitled to the presumed inheritance. Peter's demeanor shifted as he realized the financial windfall he expected was not forthcoming. This led to an aggressive outburst, further revealing the opportunistic nature of their relationship. As the inheritance proceedings progressed, it became evident that Amy's entitlement was misplaced. The subsequent months were tumultuous, marked by disputes and Amy's blatant manipulation for financial gain, which only ceased when the legal stipulations of the will were firmly enforced. Our mother's health deteriorated amidst these family conflicts, leading to her passing. The grief was compounded by the discovery of theft by Amy and Peter, who had stripped the family home of valuables in their desperate quest for wealth. The aftermath was a blend of sorrow and resolve, as I navigated the complex emotional and legal landscape left in the wake of my parents' departures, determined to uphold their legacy and protect the integrity of our family. During the aftermath of my father's funeral, the house was still resonating with murmurs about his legacy, when suddenly my sister and her husband barged in, utterly unaware of the finer details, and declared shockingly that all of Dad's stocks and a hefty $12 million inheritance were supposed to go to Amy, the eldest. "We did it, Amy. Now we're set for life," her husband exclaimed, jubilantly celebrating their premature victory. Everyone was stunned, including the lawyer, who intervened with a firm, "Hold on a minute," as my sister shot him a defiant look. The lawyer, with a grave tone, informed them, "Amy, you're not entitled to any inheritance." The room fell silent as my sister and her husband looked on in disbelief, insisting that couldn't be possible since Amy, being the oldest daughter, should inherit everything. It seemed my brother-in-law had been counting on this inheritance, but his plans were abruptly disrupted when the lawyer gently revealed a family secret. "Did you not know Amy is not Mr. Benjamin's biological child?" My sister's complexion went pale, her eyes darting in panic towards our mother, who bore a complicated expression. I had always known Amy was a half-sibling, but she had been oblivious to this fact. Overwhelmed, she confronted our mother. "What does this mean?" In a low, troubled voice, our mother confessed, "Amy, you're from my previous marriage." This revelation stunned my sister, who had often flaunted her status as the favored child. As she reeled from the shock, her husband quickly interjected, trying to salvage the situation, "But she must still have rights to the inheritance since she was legally adopted, right?" Amy echoed his sentiment, but our mother had to clarify once more, shaking her head. There was no legal adoption. This left them both incredulous, as my sister protested, "But I'm the oldest daughter." Dad even acknowledged that. Her frustration turned towards me as she accused, "You're going to take everything, aren't you?" Annoyed by her sense of entitlement despite the countless support our father had provided, I retorted, "After all the help Dad gave you and you still talk like this? Be reasonable." The argument escalated as they insisted there was nothing wrong with a father supporting his daughter. I felt the heavy burden of the situation, realizing that despite the normalcy of parental support, my sister had exploited our father's generosity for her debts and mishaps. In a bid to diffuse the tension, I suggested, "Why don't we just show Amy the will?" Her panic was evident as she realized she hadn't paid attention when Dad had discussed his will, intended for all of us to review together, a meeting she had dismissed to pursue her interests. As the reality of the situation dawned on her, her husband glared at her for her oversight, highlighting the importance of what she had neglected. When my father discussed his will, my sister chose to ignore it, preferring to spend her time elsewhere. This came to light when I mentioned her absence during those critical discussions, leading her husband to scold her sharply, emphasizing the importance of what she had missed. Reluctantly, they decided to listen to the lawyer, who then unveiled the will. It explicitly stated that the inheritance was designated for me and my mother. The will also clarified why my father had hesitated to adopt my sister. He had planned to, but became increasingly disheartened by her dismissive attitude towards me, her reckless financial habits, and her general irresponsibility as she aged. Realizing she was not entitled to the inheritance, my sister was visibly shocked. In a heated moment, her husband accused her of misleading him about her financial status, his frustration evident as he realized the fortune he anticipated was non-existent. His anger escalated quickly, and he demanded that my sister not return until she had secured some money for them. Confused and disappointed, he stormed out, leaving everyone in a state of dismay. My sister, overwhelmed by anger and frustration, turned to our mother and tearfully questioned why she hadn't been legally adopted, arguing that it was unfair she wasn't getting anything from the inheritance. Her emotional outburst startled me, but the lawyer remained composed and accustomed to handling such intense family dramas. "Why does he get everything? Because I'm Dad's son," I explained, which only fueled her fury more. She accused me of ruining her life, suggesting things might have been better if I hadn't been born. Before I could respond, the lawyer intervened, warning her that her aggressive behavior could lead to legal consequences, a reminder that made her momentarily recall her past misdemeanors. Despite the tumultuous revelation and the initial chaos it caused, the following 8 months saw the inheritance proceedings handled smoothly, thanks to the lawyer's meticulous management. My sister and her husband occasionally expressed their discontent, but they had little room to interfere. During this period, my mother, out of compassion, gave my sister some financial support, despite the strain between them. I chose to stay silent about my sister's actions, even though they greatly troubled me. She and her husband's abrupt disappearance with the funds demonstrated their blatant greed, leaving our relatives dismayed by their behavior. One afternoon, I took my mother, wife, and daughter out for lunch, a suggestion from my wife that seemed to lift my mother's spirits as she enjoyed time with her granddaughter. During our meal, I gently proposed, "Hey Mom, why don't you come live with us?" However, I cautioned her about the possibility of my sister Amy visiting only when in need of money. My mother hesitated, understandably wary given Amy's unpredictable nature and the potential trouble she could bring to a peaceful household. I asked her to consider the idea as we drove back, approaching the seemingly vacant family home, only to see lights unexpectedly on. "Let's pop in for a quick coffee," I suggested, suspecting Amy might be inside. As we neared the entrance, a car abruptly swerved towards us, narrowly missing but sending me flying into a flower bed. The shock of the near miss was palpable as my wife and daughter rushed to my aid, while my mother stood by, visibly shaken. The driver turned out to be Peter, my brother-in-law, who later claimed to the police that he had confused the accelerator with the brake, a story I found hard to believe. Recovering in the hospital, I was visited by my sister, who coldly remarked on my resilience. Her comment hinted at a darker wish behind the accident, suggesting she might have hoped for a more tragic outcome that could favor her financially. With a smirk, I retorted, "Too bad for you," noticing her discomfort at the thought. I revealed to her that our mother had decided to waive her inheritance in favor of my family, rendering any plots surrounding the accident pointless. The idea that someone might decline what they could rightfully claim seemed utterly foreign to her. As we discussed, I informed her that I had already drafted a will, following our father's example, ensuring my assets would secure the future of my wife and children. My sister, overwhelmed by the news, pleaded, "Can't you at least give me some? There's $12 million, right?" Her desperation was evident as she trembled, grappling with the realization that the financial security she coveted was slipping away. When I steadfastly denied my sister's demand for half of the inheritance, her expression twisted into one of fury as she reached out and grabbed my collar. "Give me half! I'm your sister!" she screamed, her voice tinged with a disturbing desperation, possibly driven to the edge by her financial desires. I looked at her with sadness, knowing how deeply our father would have been disappointed by her greed. Her anger escalated to a dangerous level as she lunged for my throat. "Amy, what are you doing?" my mother exclaimed, her voice filled with concern, just as the nurses hurried over to prevent any further escalation and escort my sister out of the room. Despite her instinct to protect Amy, it was evident that my sister had also lashed out at her. Heartbroken, my mother lamented, "Where did I go wrong in raising her?" It was a sorrowful moment, hearing the pain in her words. Shortly thereafter, my mother's health took a turn for the worse. As she became increasingly frail, my wife and I took on more responsibilities, helping with transportation and household chores. This seemed to irk my sister, particularly as she saw my wife's involvement during her visits to ask for money. Unexpectedly, my sister declared that she and her husband would take over caring for our mother, abruptly informing us that our help was no longer needed. Despite my attempts to discuss the matter, she hung up, leaving me worried about her inexperience and her husband's dubious care capabilities. My concerns were justified when within a month, an ambulance rushed my mother to the hospital due to a medication error, an error she had never made before. The home was in disarray, the fridge empty, the hired help dismissed, and significant sums of money missing from her bank account, though thankfully the inheritance remained secured in a safe deposit box. The situation was dire, and as I collected necessities for her hospital stay, my mother confessed that my brother-in-law had been the one managing her medication. Realizing the gravity of the situation, I suggested, "Mom, perhaps it's best not to let Amy into the house anymore." Her reply, filled with weariness, struck a deep chord. "Benjamin, I promised to take care of you, but the house is in such disarray, and you've lost so much weight. Have you been eating properly?" Concerned for her well-being, I proposed that she move in with us, where we could ensure her care together. Overwhelmed, she broke down in tears. Despite all efforts to stabilize her condition, her health continued to decline, perhaps worsened by the stress of the familial conflicts. She never fully recovered, passing away in a manner that painfully echoed my father's departure. After her passing, as I returned to the family home to arrange her funeral, I discovered that all valuables were gone. likely taken by my sister and her husband in their desperate quest for wealth. Standing in the hollow silence of the empty house, I felt a surge of resolve to hold them accountable. The next day, as I was due to meet with the lawyer alongside my sister, presumably to discuss the inheritance, she audaciously claimed, "Mom's inheritance rightfully belongs to me, her daughter." Faced with her continued entitlement and deceit, I prepared to confront the situation head-on, determined to protect my parents' legacy and seek justice for their memory. As my sister boldly claimed her right to the inheritance, I couldn't help but let out a chuckle at her grave misunderstanding. "Let's see what the will says," I suggested, prompting the lawyer to reveal its contents. As he did, my sister's face turned pale, her expectations shattered. "No, this can't be. Amy is not entitled to inherit anything. That was Dad's final wish," the lawyer clarified firmly. Her husband, unable to contain his frustration, exploded in anger, sweeping items off the table. "This is absurd. Amy is that old woman's biological child," he yelled, demanding the inheritance. I confronted him. "Peter, did you try to harm my mom?" He returned a sharp glare. "I never did such a thing," he retorted. Why was there a mistake with her medication? I pressed on, seeking the truth behind his dubious care. With a scowl, he dismissively replied, "Who cares about that, Benjamin? It's outrageous that we're not getting any inheritance." My sister lost her composure and snapped, "What have you done?" It became clear she hadn't been attentive to our mother's health, but was rather fixated on the inheritance to solve her financial problems. "Tell me this isn't true. I'm getting nothing," she demanded. The lawyer, maintaining his composure, explained the legal distribution of the inheritance. After accounting for the funds my sister had prematurely withdrawn and the items she had sold, there was hardly anything left. Frustrated, she muttered, "That can't be it. It can't be this little." Her lack of touch with the realities of work and reliance on our parents were apparent. As she faced the reality of her actions, I confronted her, unable to hide my disdain. "Mom thought you would take care of her, but you just took her money and left her on her own. You're ungrateful," I said, anger coloring my words. "What are you talking about?" she retorted defensively. "Then show me the detailed expenses you used for Mom's living costs. I'll cover what's necessary," I challenged, extending my hand for proof. Her face paled, her lips trembling. "I don't have that. Without receipts, it won't be recognized," she stammered, finding herself at a loss for words as the lawyer emphasized the need for documentation. Her husband, attempting to appeal to my sympathy, pleaded, "Benjamin, your sister really needs help? Can't you lend her a hand, even just a little?" I remained firm, my frustration at their entitlement growing. He muttered under his breath, reflecting on what might have been. If everything had gone as planned, Amy would have had the entire inheritance by now. "What do you mean by that?" I questioned sharply, looking for the hidden implications in his words, ready to uncover the full extent of their schemes. Before I could press him further, my brother-in-law inadvertently made a revealing comment. "Because of this guy, nothing ever goes smoothly. I was supposed to get a new car, but all I ended up with was barely enough for repairs." My sister quickly tried to cut in, realizing the gravity of his words, but it was already too late. "That's a serious accusation. It sounds like fraud," the lawyer pointed out, a wry smile appearing as she glanced at the troubled couple. "That's illegal. I clearly stated at the beginning of this meeting that it would be recorded, and you both agreed to it," she reminded them. Realizing his blunder, my brother-in-law paled. Turning to him, I declared resolutely, "Peter, I'll be pressing charges for that accident." "Don't be absurd. There's no evidence," he retorted hastily. "You've just provided the evidence yourself," I countered sharply. Overwhelmed by the situation, my sister broke down in tears, berating him. "You fool! It's all your fault. What are we going to do now?" Eventually, my brother-in-law faced criminal charges as his prior offenses came to light, leading to his detention by the police. My sister, implicated as an accomplice, received a lesser sentence. Struggling financially and unable to afford her rent, She sought assistance from relatives but found herself rejected by everyone. As for me, I continued to focus on my career, diligently working without depending on any inheritance. I found comfort in the dividends from stocks, which served as a small but satisfying pleasure, a reminder of the rewards of honest labor and prudent investment.